Most people think fog is peaceful, quiet, calm, almost beautiful. But there's something unsettling about it too, because fog doesn't just hide the road ahead, it hides everything. Shapes become shadows, sounds travel in strange ways, and sometimes things appear where there should be nothing. Tonight, you're going to hear 3 true horror stories that happened in thick, silent fog. Stories where ordinary people stepped into that gray mist and suddenly realized they weren't alone. And in some cases, they didn't make it back out. The first story happened during a cold autumn night in 2018. A man named Eric was driving home from work along a long rural highway in northern Pennsylvania. It was nearly 1:30 in the morning and the road was almost completely empty. Eric worked late shifts. Driving at night was normal for him. Usually the drive was quiet and uneventful, but something felt different. About 20 minutes into his drive, Eric noticed a thin layer of fog starting to drift across the pavement. Within minutes, the fog grew thicker and thicker until it formed a heavy gray wall around the highway. Eric slowed down and leaned forward over the steering wheel, trying to see past the glow of his headlights. The strange thing about driving through fog is how silent everything becomes. The world feels muffled. Then something appeared ahead of him. At first, it looked like a dark object near the shoulder of the road, but as his car moved closer, the shape slowly became clearer. It was a person, someone standing. Eric frowned, confused. This road ran through miles of farmland and forest, no houses nearby. The figure stood perfectly still near the edge of the pavement, tall, thin, facing away from the road. For a brief moment, Eric considered stopping to ask if they needed help. But then the figure moved, not their body, just their head. As Eric's car rolled past them, the person slowly turned their head. Eric caught a quick glimpse of their face, pale, expressionless, eyes wide open, staring directly at him. Eric felt a chill run down his spine. Something about that stare made his chest tighten with unease. He pressed the gas pedal slightly and continued down the highway, hoping to leave the strange encounter behind. Within seconds, the fog swallowed the figure completely. Eric tried to shrug it off. Maybe it was just someone. But about 3 minutes later, something else appeared ahead of him. Another person. Eric felt his stomach tighten. The figure looked identical to the first one. Same height, same thin silhouette, same still posture. Eric slowed again, his mind racing. This didn't make sense. No way 2 different people. As he approached the second figure, his headlights illuminated them clearly. Eric realized something horrifying. It was the same person, same dark coat, same pale face, and just like before, it stared directly at him. Eric's heart started pounding. He accelerated immediately, gripping the steering wheel tightly. But then something appeared in his rearview mirror. Another silhouette standing in the middle of the road, completely still, watching his car disappear into the fog. Eric didn't stop driving until he reached the next town. Even now, he still insists that the 2 figures were the exact same person somehow appearing ahead of him again. And that night, he swears he saw something else too, when he looked into his rearview mirror one last time. Before the fog faded away, he thought he saw several more silhouettes standing along the road. The second story happened in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, where thick fog rolls in almost every night. A woman named Rachel lived in a small house near the edge of town. Behind her neighborhood was a forest. One evening around 10 p.m., Rachel realized she had left her phone charger in her car parked outside. The moment she opened the door, she saw the fog had already rolled in. It was thick, thicker than she had ever seen. Rachel walked slowly toward her car, the beam of her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the mist. When she reached her car, she unlocked the door and leaned inside to grab the charger. She heard something. Footsteps, somewhere out in the fog. At first she assumed it was a neighbor, but then she noticed something strange. The footsteps stopped when she stopped moving. Rachel stood perfectly still, listening. Then she took another step, and the footsteps started again, slow, careful, moving somewhere just beyond the reach of her flashlight. Rachel turned around quickly and pointed the beam of light into the fog. Nothing, just swirling gray mist. Her heart began beating faster. She told herself it was probably just someone, but the feeling said otherwise. Rachel started walking faster toward her porch. The footsteps followed again, not rushing, just matching her pace. By the time she reached the steps leading to her front door, her hands were shaking. She climbed onto the porch and turned around one last time. At first she saw nothing. Then slowly, a dark silhouette began forming. Someone was standing there, completely still, watching her. Rachel couldn't see their face clearly. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She quickly unlocked her door and rushed inside. The moment the door locked, the footsteps outside stopped. Rachel ran to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside to look outside. The driveway was empty. The figure was gone. For the next several nights, Rachel kept hearing strange noises outside whenever the fog rolled in. Sometimes it sounded like slow footsteps. Other times it sounded like someone standing just beyond her porch. But every time she looked outside, she saw nothing, just fog. And what happened in the final story is even more disturbing because in that case, the fog didn't just hide something strange. It hid something that was hunting. The final story comes from a group of 3 friends who went hiking in a remote national forest in Washington state. The forest was massive, stretching for miles in every direction, filled with towering trees and narrow trails that twisted deep into the wilderness. The 3 friends were named Daniel, Marcus, and Tyler. They had planned a simple day hike along one of the marked trails. It was a popular trail during the summer, but by late autumn, hardly anyone visited it anymore. The sky was clear and the air was cold but calm. The forest looked beautiful. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, and the trail was easy to follow. Everything seemed completely normal. For the first couple hours, the hike was quiet and relaxing. They joked around, took photos, and talked about grabbing food. But sometime around mid-afternoon, the weather suddenly began to change. Daniel noticed it first. A thin layer of fog moved slowly through the trees. At first it looked harmless, just a faint mist drifting between the branches. But within minutes, it grew thicker. Marcus checked his phone and frowned. The weather forecast hadn't mentioned fog at all. They decided to keep moving. According to the map, they were only about 20 minutes away. But the fog continued to thicken. Sunlight disappeared completely. The forest turned gray and dim, and the trail ahead became harder to see. Their voices sounded different too, almost muffled. Tyler laughed nervously and said the forest suddenly felt like something out of a horror movie. None of them realized how accurate that statement would become. As they continued walking, Daniel began to feel something strange. The forest was too quiet. Normally you hear birds, insects, wind, but now there was nothing. No birds, no animals, not even the sound of branches creaking, just the faint crunch of their boots. They walked for another 10 minutes before Marcus suddenly stopped. "Wait, do you hear that?" The other 2 froze. At first there was nothing. Then Daniel heard it, a sound somewhere deeper in the fog. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps. Tyler turned his head toward the trees. "Probably another hiker," he said, though his voice sounded uncertain. Marcus called out into the fog, "Hello?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. The 3 friends looked at each other uneasily. Daniel suggested they keep moving. The lookout tower had to be close by now, and the fog was making the forest feel increasingly unsettling. So they continued along the trail. But after another few minutes, the sound came back. Footsteps again, this time closer, much closer. It sounded like someone walking parallel to them. Marcus stopped again. "Okay, that's weird." Tyler called out louder this time. "Hey, are you on the trail?" Silence. Then something moved in the fog. Daniel saw it first. A tall shadow passing between the trees about 20 yards away. For a moment he felt relieved. It really was another person, but then the shadow stopped and slowly turned toward them. Even through the fog, Daniel could tell something about the figure was wrong. It was too tall, and it wasn't standing on the trail. It was deep in the trees where the ground was thick with fallen branches and brush. Marcus whispered, "Do you see that?" The shape stood completely still for several seconds. Then it moved, not walking, not stepping over branches, just gliding slowly between the trees. The three friends stared in disbelief. Tyler felt a cold wave of fear rush through him. Okay, that's not normal. They quickly decided to keep walking. At this point, none of them wanted to stay there any longer than necessary. But as they hurried down the trail, the footsteps returned again. Now they were louder and closer. Branches snapped somewhere behind them. Daniel glanced back and felt his heart slam against his chest. Another shadow was moving through the fog, this time much closer to the trail. "Guys, we need to go," he said quietly. They started walking faster. Then the footsteps behind them suddenly turned into running, heavy, fast movement crashing through the trees. Marcus shouted, "Run!" All three of them bolted down the trail. The fog made it almost impossible to see more than 10 feet ahead, but they didn't stop running. Behind them, they could hear something moving, branches breaking, leaves crunching, something big pushing through the woods. Daniel risked a quick look back. Through the fog, he saw a tall shape burst out between two trees. For a split second, he thought it was a person, but the way it moved was wrong. Its arms looked too long, its stride was unnatural, and it was gaining on them. The friends ran harder than they ever had in their lives. Suddenly, the trees ahead opened up. The lookout tower appeared. Through the fog just 20 yards away, they sprinted toward it. Marcus reached the ladder first and began climbing. Tyler and Daniel followed right behind him. As Daniel grabbed the ladder and started climbing, he looked down toward the foggy trail below, and what he saw froze his blood. Something had stopped at the edge of the clearing, a tall dark silhouette standing just inside the fog, watching them. It didn't move closer, it didn't make a sound, it just stood there, staring. The three friends stayed inside the lookout tower for nearly an hour until the fog finally began to thin, and when the mist eventually faded away, the clearing below the tower was completely empty. There were no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had ever chased them through the forest. To this day, none of the three friends can explain what they saw. But they all agree on one thing. Fog doesn't just hide the road. Sometimes it hides things that were already there. Things waiting silently for someone to wander too far into the mist. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Mystery Spectrum US for more disturbing mysteries and real stories that will keep you awake at night. And before you go, tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced something strange in the fog? Because sometimes the most terrifying moments happen when you can't see what's standing right in front of you.